From the field to the film room to the war room, we've got you covered every step of the way as the road to the draft starts right now on BGN Radio. Hello and welcome to another episode of the BGN Draft Show. I am your host, Shane Haff, and you can follow me on Twitter and YouTube at Shane Haff NFL. I'm joined today by my co-host, a fellow draft enthusiast, Dives. Give him a follow on Twitter at Mr. Crockpot. Be sure to check out all of his scouting videos he's been putting out on Twitter. He is way ahead of me in this game. Dives, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, man. We're talking about a class tonight that is all over the place. We're going to learn a lot after the upcoming NFL scouting combine in just a week. But for real, man, we might be we're friends now, but by the end of this show, who knows what? So this is an interesting class.
The nugget we can drop right here without spoiling things and naming names is that this draft class truly is all over the place. The guy that I have number one is not in Mark or Dibe's top five. The guy they have number one is not in my top five. And then we all have the same number two. So we're all over the place. Everyone is all over the place on this running back class. And we'll talk about that some. But before we do, Mark is also here with us, my co-host on Chalk Talk. Give him a follow on Twitter at Mark Henry Jr. _ Be sure to check out his Tough Cover radio show every Saturday. Mark, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. I will preface the show by saying I do not have a running back in my top 70 this year. So that should give you a little bit of an insight on the position. But I think I have 9 running backs in my top 100. So the number one guy that I'm going to talk about on this show, not a huge difference between guys that I won't even get to talk about that won't be my top 5 or my honorable mention. So just a little bit. We're doing this before the combine, and I don't want to let the combine greatly impact my opinion on a player, especially at running back. We've seen what that can do with Kyren Williams in the past. But obviously when these margins are so close, there will be things that happen in the draft process that influence these rankings for me for sure.
Yeah, I will never forget talking myself out of Kyren Williams. I loved Kyren Williams. I had a little bit of concerns about his speed, and then when he didn't run the 40, I dropped him. And, of course, we all saw what Kyren Williams did with Los Angeles this year. So hopefully not making that mistake again. So let's dive into it here. We're going to give you our top 5 running backs, 1 to 5. We'll call out some honorable mentions, which may be a guy that just missed the cut. Maybe it's a guy that we just like on day 3, but we'll call some of those out at the end. And so, Mark, I'm going to throw it to you here first. You and Dibes have the same number 1, but he's from your school. So I'll let you talk about Audric Estime.
Yeah, Audric Estime is a guy who I've obviously watched more than any other running back in this class, so I am a little biased when it comes down to that. But 5'11", 227, plays much bigger than that. You watch him, you'd think he's like 6'2", 240, which maybe you could point to that and say that's not going to be he's not going to look as dominant at the next level. But limited tread on the tires, only 2 years as a contributor and only 1 as the real full-time complement starter back. He was first in yards per carry in that year with a full-time complement of starter carries. First in yards per carry for running backs over 200 plus attempts right there at 6.4 yards per carry, 1,500 total yards in 2023 after 1,000 in 2022, 29 touchdowns over the last 2 years. Just great vision and a really, really good one-cut ability, which makes a pretty deadly combo with the way that he's a brute force runner as well. I think for me, he's pretty easily the best runner in this class when it just comes to just straight up running the football. The reason that he's not a runaway number 1 guy for anyone really is because not a lot of receiving ability, or he at least hasn't showcased a ton of receiving ability. But I think what he lacks in that, he makes up for in fantastic pass blocking. He had a 94.2 PFF grade overall as a running back, which was 3rd in college football. People always, by the way, I'm back on the draft comparisons. I'm back in the draft comparisons mud, already getting the piece that I'm going to write later on this offseason ready. And I've started with the running backs. People go to Jerome Bettis with Estime because of the Notre Dame tie to that. But he was like an inch or two taller and like 30 pounds heavier. It's funny to compare someone to someone when their son is literally in the draft process, but there's a lot of Frank Gore to Audric Estime.
All right. Dibes, Estime's your number one too. What do you like about him?
Yeah, I agree with everything Mark said. He touched on pretty much everything. Like I see this guy as like kind of a throwback running back. I see him as a great counterpunch to a team that already has, a kind of a receiving running back like Kenny Gainwell. I see the fit. I think he would be a great selection for the Eagles late day 2 if he's sitting there. But I think he is one of the few running backs in this class that gives you true 3-down potential at the next level. And that's why I'm so high on him. And Audric Estime, I put shorts on the channel every single week. And he was one of my guys that I thought consistently produced for Notre Dame, from being a true downhill one-cut runner to flashing upside as a receiver to excellent pass protection. So he is my number one.
Yeah, the pass protection's big. There's not a lot of good pass protecting running backs that come out in the draft. There's certainly not this year. And so that's something, the Eagles obviously struggled with last year. Audric Estime could be a good fit. The thunder, if you will, to Kenny Gainwell's lightning for the Eagles. So he's definitely someone to keep an eye on there for Philadelphia. I had him at number 6, so he just missed for me. If we were doing a top 6 show, I would have been talking about him. But I had him just barely outside my top 5. So the guy that I had number 1 is a guy that comes with some pretty big medical red flags. And that is Jonathan Brooks, the running back out of Texas. So he was a 4-star recruit coming out of high school. He redshirted in 2021. And then, he didn't get much work in 2022 because he was behind Brian Robinson and Roschon Johnson that year. He only had 30 rushing attempts in 2022. In 2023, he became the lead back for Texas, and he had a great season before he tore his ACL on November 11th, which is where those red flags come in. I try not to read too much into those because I always say I'm not in a position to know about character concerns, which I'm not saying he has, or medical red flags. There's people that know that. All I'm going by is what I'm seeing when I watch the guy play. And he's just so much fun to watch play. He's 6 foot, 202 pounds. So he's a little small for his size, but he is a very sudden runner. Like, he's got excellent stop-start ability. He is a plus as a receiver. And I think he's a decent pass blocker too. Like, he can chip and release. You can let him pick up blitzing linebackers and defensive backs. I thought he did a pretty good job there. And again, I don't think I'm going to say that about any other running backs on this show. He's got really good vision. I think he's at his best running outside zone, where he can use his suddenness to find those cutback lanes. He can bounce it outside and use his speed if he's able to get to the edge. He runs with really good balance through contact. Like, for his weight, he's often able to bounce off guys and keep moving forward more often than you would expect. He accelerates really quick. I mentioned he's sudden, but he just explodes out of his cuts. Now, obviously, he was injured in his only season as a lead back, and he's going to be coming off that injury as a rookie. And he'd probably be ready for the start of a regular season, but he's probably going to miss all of training camp and things like that. And that's never good. Although we do know running back is a position guys can typically step in right away. So he does have that slim frame. I think he carries the ball loosely. He didn't really fumble a lot in college, but the NFL is a different story. So I've got a 2nd-round grade on Jonathan Brooks. I think he would fit best in an outside zone scheme. Neither of you guys have him in your top 5. How far off do you have him? And is it mostly because of the injury?
Yeah, for me, I had him RB7, and I probably would have him RB3 through 5, somewhere in that range. Definitely would have him above Corum, who I have at number 5, spoiler alert. Who I would definitely have him above him if he was fully healthy. For the issue with running back in general, and the issue of why I always kind of devalue them in my rankings, is because all I really care about is the rookie contract. And I think we've seen now with ACL injuries, whether it be Cam Akers, whether it be Breece Hall, whether it be a lot of guys we've seen now, they aren't themselves right away. So even if they do get that form back in the year after the ACL injury, usually takes about a half season before they start to look like themselves again. And that's if they don't get hurt in that half season leading up to that. So, and then we've also seen guys kind of, it changes who they are. So he wasn't a good enough or dominant enough player on tape for me to ignore the concerns of, I don't think he's going to be who I need him to be in year one, and I only am going to have him for 4 years. And I also, what if he's not even as good as he was because of the injury? But I usually don't like to do the injury stuff, but an ACL or a knee thing with a running back feels more relevant to me.
Yeah, I hilariously, I have him also as my running back 7 in my rankings, and I don't trust the Texas running backs. I just don't at this point, because it's almost becoming like a running back factory, for better or worse. Like CJ Baxter, Jaden Blue, they all looked terrific last year, and I feel like they're starting to really turn out some guys. I don't know if that's because of the system. I don't know if that's because of the player. I don't know yet. I need more information. But out of Jonathan Brooks, I think the upside is there, but I have more of a day 3 kind of guy. A guy that's a good prospect, but doesn't give you like a plus attribute that some of my top 5 guys have.
It's interesting you mentioned the system, because I actually have that tab for a different player and a different system on why someone didn't make my top 5. But Sark's system definitely is beneficial to be a running back in. And I think that was kind of part of why, and I was vocal about this last year, I didn't think Bijan Robinson was a generational running back prospect in the way that a lot of people did. And I think he looked a lot better than maybe he was because of that Texas system. And I think there's a little bit of that playing into that with me, with Brooks as well, Dives. So I'm glad you mentioned that.
All right. Well, there's our number 1s that aren't on each other's top 5s. Let's go to the number 2 that we all have in common. Dives, talk to me about Bucky Irving.
Bucky Irving, man, really fun prospect. I don't know if he's the best fit for the Philadelphia Eagles, but he is pound for pound just a blast to watch, man. Easily one of the most frustrating guys to bring down if you are an opposing defender. Elite change of direction ability. In the open field, man, he's got elite short area agility, just elite creativity. When this guy's in open space, man, watch out. His athleticism is off the charts. He's able to hit a hole. He's able to get to his top speed instantaneously. And he's a really good pass catcher. This is arguably the best receiver running back in this draft. He's, just got soft hands. He's got good concentration. He's got some contested catch ability. I think that's going to be the bread and butter of this guy's career early on. I don't know if he's a 3-down running back, but that's going to be a big time trait for him, especially in fantasy football if you're into that. But when you get to negatives, obviously the size and the frame, he's small, 5'10", 194 pounds. He's not a good pass protector. So I just think this guy's a baller, man. I think this guy is going to be kind of that change of speed back in a committee. That's going to obviously limit his ceiling for some NFL teams. But if you already have a north-south downhill runner, and to add Bucky Irving to that list, to that backfield, I think would be a really good selection in that day 2 area. Bucky Irving, man, was every bit a monster for the Oregon Ducks. And for me, I think he's one of those high floor prospects in this draft for a running back class that doesn't have a lot of them. So for me, Bucky Irving is great prospect. I think he's going to dominate the scouting combine. And I see him sometime in that round 3, round 4 area.
All right. Mark, I know you've been really high on Irving. I go back to the BGN draft show in season and the jump cut of his that you were just salivating over. What do you love so much about Irving?
Yeah, it's the jump cuts. I mean, the things he can do in the open field are just so incredible. He's an incredible receiver, soft hands, really good in the open field in terms of as a receiver as well. He's someone I think you could even like line up in the slot in certain packages and run plays for like that. A lot of Kyren Williams and Bucky Irving, to be quite honest. The one difference, it's a big difference, is Kyren Williams is one of the best pass protecting running backs I've ever seen come out of college, whereas Bucky is not in. It looks like he's not interested in pass protecting when he's blocking in that system. I actually had Bucky as my RB1 initially. The thing that I struggle with is, despite him being such a good receiver, is that going to be a problem being able to use him in those situations when he can't protect at all? Because if that means he's in, it means that he's going out for a pass. It makes it a little bit easier to cover him out of the backfield. So that's why I do think maybe you split him out wide and you get him involved that way. But he's an incredibly, incredibly versatile player. I loved watching Bucky Irving at Oregon, and I think he made Bo Nix, I think he made his job a whole lot easier.
Yeah, he's not just like a check down guy. Like, he can actually go run routes. And I think that's probably his best trait. But like you said, one of his worst traits is his pass blocking. And to be honest, at 195 pounds, it's likely always going to be a struggle for him to square up linebackers and things like that. So it's a guy that you're going to have to figure out how to use. And I think he's electric to watch. He's not going to fit every team, but he's an interesting player for sure. So, okay, let's get into our number 3s, and I will lead us off here with Trey Benson, who is my running back 3 out of Florida State. He was a 3-star recruit who committed to Oregon. Then he had a major knee injury, a major knee injury in 2020. He tore his ACL, his MCL, his lateral and medial meniscus, and his hamstring. That's a bad day in the office. He basically missed all of 2021, transfers to Florida State in 2022, rushed for 990 yards on 154 carries, 9 touchdowns. He was PFF's 11th highest graded rusher in 2022. Then in 2023, the yards per attempt came down a little bit, but he rushed for 906 yards and 14 touchdowns. He caught 20 passes for 227 yards and a touchdown. Almost 10% of his carries this season went for 15 plus yards, which is just kind of a wild stat. He's 6'1", 223 pounds, so he's got really good size. He's got really good speed and burst. He has great long speed. Reportedly ran a 4.3. We'll see at the combine,
Really?
but he also, reportedly ran a 4.3, but he also accelerates really quickly. I think he's a guy that the combine's probably going to be huge for. He runs violently in the open field. He's not just a speed guy that tries to run around everybody. He is quite happy to run through you. But I think one of the most encouraging things for him is how much better he got in terms of like his vision from the beginning of 2022 to now. He's really good at finding those cutback lanes. Florida State ran a lot of gap and zone schemes, and so he's operated out of both of them. I think he's a pretty scheme diverse guy. However, I will say he wasn't asked to pass block much, but in the few times he did, there's some pretty bad reps on film when he was asked to. He's also not the most elusive runner. I feel like he doesn't like cut sharply. Like he doesn't change directions very sharply. Part of that is probably that size, that higher pad level. It makes it harder to do that. But, I think he's a fun player to watch. He's a guy that I have somewhere in like the late second round as well. I don't think he'll go a lot higher than that just because I don't think any running backs really will this year. But Benson's a fun guy to watch. Where did you guys have him?
I have him at number 4. I think he's a very good prospect. I'm shocked at the 4.3 report. That's going to be huge for him. Like I saw him more as quick than fast as a prospect. Trey Benson, you brought up the medical history. He's not. I don't find him that explosive. He's a guy that a lot of people are really high on, but I just don't see it. He's a downhill runner. He's a guy that's going to give what the defenses kind of allow him. That's going to be his bread and butter at the next level. The pass protection is not good. I feel like he's overrated in some regards. But that doesn't mean he's not a good prospect. I feel like all these guys are kind of in that same tier. So as a day 2 guy, I'm just a little lower on him because of the lack of pass protection. I don't think he's as elusive as Audric Estime. And he doesn't have the wiggle of Audric Estime, who does like hurdles and things like that. So that's why I'm a little bit lower on Trey Benson. But there are a lot of people out there that think he's the number 1 guy in this class and think he's a stud.
All right. Mark, anything you want to add in on on Benson before we move on?
I'm not a big Trey Benson guy. To me, there's a lot of Leonard Fournette there. Like I think he's just not going to really excel in any area. Not a lot of pass blocking, not a lot of receiving. That at least on tape, that doesn't always mean you can't do it, but we can only judge based on what he's done realistically. And then to me, I kind of agree with you guys with the lack of elusiveness. He's just not a guy that jumps off the screen to me. So when you couple the lack of receiving, the lack of pass blocking with not jumping off the screen as a runner to me, even though the stats look pretty good, the yards per carry, very good. PFF grades, very good. So maybe I'm being unfair. Maybe he's capturing the stat sheet in a way that isn't coming to me on tape. But yeah, I'm willing to be wrong here. I have him at RB10. He's definitely not someone I'm all that interested in.
All right. Well, let's talk about a guy you are interested in. Your number 3 is running back Ray Davis. So take it away, Mark.
And this is someone who's going to be like RB10 for a lot of people. So
I'm really high on Ray Davis. I love Ray Davis.
Yeah, he's a guy that I loved watching at Kentucky, and maybe maybe had the best year last year of any of these guys. I think he was so good in 2023, and at least maybe if not the best year, he was the most important to his team last year. He was the absolute motor of that Kentucky offense, and he was really, really fun to watch. 5'10", 216. In 2022 he had 1,044 yards. Really bad yards per carry, honestly, 4.5 yards per carry. That O-line was really, really bad. Bad offensive coordinator, Eddie Grant, who I think actually just got hired to something in the NFL recently. And the tweet was like, oh, he's really good, really good coach from Kentucky. And it's like, oh, they really needed to get rid of him. And then he had an 82.7 PFF grade in 2022, but he was way better in 2023. Only had about 100 more yards, but he had a 5.7 yards per carry, 14 touchdowns as opposed to 5. In both years, though, he really excelled as a receiver. 29 catches in 2022, 32 catches in 2023. That doesn't sound all that, it doesn't sound like he had 60 catches. But Kentucky's offense doesn't exactly light the world on fire in general. I mean, we know that from watching Will Levis tape from last year. So that's actually a pretty good amount of catches for that offense. And he really impressed people at the Senior Bowl, especially with his hands. People were saying he looked like a wide receiver coming out of the backfield with how good his hands were. There's some Rashad White in him. And if I'm going to get a little lofty, there's maybe even some Dalvin Cook with him. Like I really do think it could be a really, really good player at the next level. One negative, really old. He's like 24. So not exactly, maybe not a lot of untapped potential to be had with Ray Davis. So it's definitely something that factors in. There's another running back on my list that's a little older as well. That's probably holding me back from being a little higher on them, such as same with Ray Davis. You could argue that I might like Ray Davis more than Bucky Irving if he was 21.
All right.
I like Ray Davis a lot. I have him number 8 right below Jonathan Brooks. And for a lot of the reasons you just said, and we just talked about Trey Benson. Like, there's not that much difference between Ray Davis and Trey Benson. Like, they're all kind of in that same tier for me. So I'm really high on Ray Davis.
It is the same issue as Bucky Irving, though. Not good in pass protection, really. So it's really good receiver, not great in pass protection. Going to be an issue in how he can get used. Both of them are going to have to get better at that.
Yeah.
All right, Dibes. That brings us to your number 3. Talk to me about Jaylen Wright.
All right, one of the most underrated running backs in this class by far. Jaylen Wright is a really fun prospect, extremely efficient. Rushed for over 1,000 yards, 7.4 yards per carry last year. He's got lightning quick feet, and this is one of the more athletic running backs in this class. He's improved every year in Knoxville the last 3 years. In terms of ball security, in terms of balance, in terms of burst, top end speed. I feel like he's just gotten better and better as a running back. I feel like he's climbing the draft boards and nobody really knows about him. And he's a really fun prospect to watch. He's even shown improvement as a pass blocker. He's just a well-rounded running back. For Tennessee, just like another cornerback out of Tennessee, Kamal Haddon, who is another criminally underrated cornerback prospect. But Jaylen Wright, weaknesses-wise, he doesn't have a lot of mass. He's only like 210 pounds, 5'11". Doesn't have that like Bucky Irving change of pace, change of speed ability. But for me, I think what makes him shine is the combine. I think he's going to really dominate the upcoming scouting combine. I think he's going to run somewhere in the 4.3s. He's that fast. And I think people are going to start finally realizing how good this guy is. He doesn't have a lot of tread on his tires. He's a stellar pass blocker. He's got super high receiving upside, and he's only 21 years old. He just turned 21. So this is one of those kind of home run swing developmental guys with a high ceiling where you look at the list on the board here. A lot of those guys are more high floor guys. I think Jaylen Wright has got a bigger ceiling than a lot of the guys we just talked about. So Jaylen Wright out of Tennessee is just criminally underrated in this class.
Okay, I thought Mark was about to say something there.
I thought you were too.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I have Wright as my RB6, so he just missed out here for me. And the reason, honestly, is I'm starting to get a little skeptical of Tennessee's offense. They're so efficient. Everyone breaks records with their efficiency. I might have even gotten tricked a little bit with it last year with Jalen Hyatt. And even Cedric Tillman to a lesser degree. Neither really, I don't know, maybe Shane can correct me. I wouldn't say neither really jumped off the page in their first NFL season. Jalen Hyatt had a couple moments here and there, pretty bad situation, but I don't think that, I guess I shouldn't base anything on Tennessee's offense negatively based on those guys so new into their careers. But even dating back to Josh Heupel's days at UCF, it feels like his offenses are just so uber efficient that it's hard for me to even grade. It's I almost have to grade his guys on a curve. I mean, great system that they run in Tennessee, but I'm a little bit nervous that system might just be a little bit of one, back in the day when Case Keenum would throw for 8,000 yards at Houston with 800 touchdowns in a season, and he would go in the 7th round, or Colt Brennan at Hawaii. I might have to start treating Tennessee like that a little bit.
Yeah, I remember talking about that last year with Hendon Hooker about the system. I didn't apply it as much to the receivers, but I'm sure there's a bit of both at play because, for everything, the Giants had a terrible quarterback situation this year, so it's a little hard with Jalen Hyatt. Cedric Tillman was in Cleveland. He didn't have a much better quarterback situation with the Browns. So, but yeah, that's fair.
They were kind of desperate for someone to step up, though, and he didn't really step up.
I can't believe Mark just said that. Hyatt was your boy. That was
I know. I love him. I still hold out hope. I still hold out hope, but I felt like they were also desperate for someone to step up, and he didn't really. But also he had Tommy Cullis and Tyrod Taylor. I'm already
The
back to
Giants are an
business.
experiment, and what if we had 7 slot receivers and no
Yeah,
outside
that's part of the
receivers
problem too.
and no quarterback?
To be the part of the problem with that argument for me is that I was pretty bullish on the fact that I thought Hyatt could be an outside receiver, but nevertheless.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I forgot that. That was a bad take, Mark. All right, that gets us through our top 3. It gets us Deib's number 4 as well. We will keep chugging along here. I'll lead us off at number 4s with Blake Corum, who Mark is booing. Blake Corum was the 2019 Gatorade High School Player of the Year for Maryland. Mark, put some respect on his name.
Yeah, he's on my list.
He's a 4-star recruit committed to Michigan. He is 5'8", 213 pounds, so he's really short. 8th percentile height, 49th percentile weight. He was a first-team All-American in 2022, third-team All-American in 2023. His yards per carry have dropped every year he was a major starter, starting in 2021 at 6.6 to 5.9 in 2022 to 4.8 in 2023. So that is something that, might bear watching. But I think he's got excellent vision. He hits the hole consistently, and I think he stays really tight to his blockers and kind of uses them, like positions them between himself and the linebackers. He's able to outmaneuver them. He's a very patient runner. He's taken a lot of snaps in zone and gap schemes. He's been under center. He's been in shotgun. He's a well-rounded running back. I think he's got good lateral agility, so he can sort of evade defenders. But he's got 675 carries at the collegiate level. He's got 56 receptions, so he's got well over 700 career touches. That's not ideal necessarily, because we talk about how running backs don't last long, and he's got a lot of carries, a lot of wear and tear. He also has an injury history. He tore his MCL in late 2022 that caused him to miss the postseason. I think he's kind of sluggish as an accelerator, and he's not a tremendously powerful runner. He's a bad pass protector too. Most of it's technique. Like, I feel like he identifies who he should block well, and he's willing. His technique's just bad. And overall, like, he's just got a certain ceiling because of his size, that 8th percentile height, and his relatively lesser athletic abilities. So, he's my running back 4. I think he would be better in a gap scheme than a zone scheme, but I think you could put him in either one. I think he goes, kind of mid to late day 2, somewhere in the 3rd round probably. But Blake Corum, I don't know. He's not exciting, but I think he's a solid player.
Yeah, he's the face of the Harbaugh era, of Michigan, or at least the successful version of the Harbaugh era. His 3 years, that he was a contributor, they went to the playoff each year, won the title, obviously, in his last year. Funny thing about that is he actually had his worst yards per carry in PFF grade in 2023 when he had 27 touchdowns and helped them win the title. 56 rushing touchdowns in the last 3 years with 3,700 rushing yards. So definitely a lot of tread on the tires. So you could look at that as a negative, but obviously you look at the production as a positive. I wish he was more or had more receiving on tape, but I think there's a chance he just wasn't asked to do it a ton. When you look at what he did do, when you watch it, feels like he was pretty natural. Feels like he could be really good at it if that's something he was asked to do more, to be honest. But again, just like Ray Davis, older 24-year-old prospect. So I have a stat with my next player that I'll talk about that relates to Blake Corum that I saw that I thought was interesting and kind of plays on the age factor of it. But Blake Corum, I think he's someone who you can expect to be someone who can play a role on your team immediately when you draft him.
All right. Deibs, anything you want to chip in on Corum?
He's solely on my list, I think, at number 5, just because he's a winner. Like, I am not a Blake Corum guy. I haven't been for quite some time. And he's proved me wrong over and over and over again. But I just struggle to find out, like, what his role is in the NFL, given his lack of pass protection. But I mean, you can't deny production. Shane, you brought up the yards per carry decrease, but he's a winner, and he's on my list because he keeps, doing exactly what I don't expect him to do. I always thought Donovan Edwards was a better prospect than him, but here we are.
All right. Let's keep it rolling here then. Just saying, the Chargers are going to absolutely draft Blake Corum now that they hired Harbaugh. But
there's a lot of mid-round Michigan guys. It is astounding how many Michigan guys I have ranked between like 50 and 100 on my list. So, I mean, they're going to be rumored for all those guys for sure.
They're just going to trade out of the first round and accumulate mid-round picks and get them all. Recreate the Michigan Wolverines.
With
all
Justin
right.
Herbert.
Mark, talk to me about Braylon Allen.
This guy's a monster among running backs. I mean, 6'2". I have him at 245 here. The graphic says 235. Maybe he put on some pounds. 3-year contributor, but he just turned 20, like days ago. Just turned 20. So the fun stat that I mentioned with Corum, NCAA production before turning 20 years old. Blake Corum, 12 carries, 33 rushing yards, and 2 touchdowns. Braylon Allen, 597 carries, 3,500 yards, and 35 touchdowns. So maybe you could make the argument that we got to see what Braylon Allen had at such a younger age that there's even more untapped potential. Whereas Blake Corum, Ray Davis, guys like that, maybe they are what they are. When it comes to Braylon Allen, he was remarkably consistent for his 3-year college career. Doesn't get hurt, gains about 1,300 yards, scores about 11 or 12 touchdowns. He did improve on his receiving ability throughout his time at Wisconsin. He was an amazing pass blocker. The question really is, could he be, a poor man's Derrick Henry, or is he more A.J. Dillon? Where
I think he's like a Brandon Jacobs. Yeah,
I think he's faster than Brandon Jacobs. Like the problem that I have with Allen is all the guys that those big bruising kind of like touchdown vulture type guys. I think he's more than them. I think he has more wiggle. I think he has more to his rushing ability. And he's such a violent runner. I love watching Braylon Allen play. He's another guy who was an excellent high school prospect, one of the better high school prospects Wisconsin's ever gotten, if I'm not mistaken. At the time, I remember Wisconsin fans were losing their mind and that's why he played so young as a freshman, because he was such a huge prospect. It's going to be really interesting to see. You don't see a lot of guys like Braylon Allen. I'm rooting for him. All
right. Deibs, anything else you want to chime in on Braylon Allen? I know he was on your list too.
Yeah, what you see is what you get. He is a freight train. That's what he is. If you're looking for a third down back to get you short yardage, goal line, and you got to think if I'm Howie Roseman, he's got to be a lot higher on this list, because that's exactly what they need, that downhill runner to move the chains. He would be a great addition for the Birds.
All right. So there you have it. Our top 5s. I went 1 to 5, Jonathan Brooks, Bucky Irving, Trey Benson, Blake Corum, Braylon Allen. Mark went 1 to 5, Audric Estime, Bucky Irving, Ray Davis, Braylon Allen, and Blake Corum. And Deibs went 1 to 5, Audric Estime, Bucky Irving, Jaylen Wright, Trey Benson, and Blake Corum. Like we said, running backs are a little bit all over the place. And we would see a lot of these names that got left out on everybody's list if we extended to a top 10, but we did not. So before we get out of here, though, we're going to give you guys a couple honorable mentions. This can be somebody that we like as a day 3 fit to the Eagles, or a guy that just barely missed the cut, or just somebody that really popped during the college football season that didn't make it into the show. Deibs, I'll throw it to you first. Give me an honorable mention, or maybe a couple guys that you really like that just didn't make your top 5.
There's several. Cody Schrader's nice. Rasheen Ali is nice. Isaiah Davis is nice. But the guy that popped off tape for me, and I think is one of the most or underrated sleeper picks of day 3. He is Amari Bailey out of TCU. The guy is extremely quick. He had over 1,200 yards, 8 touchdowns, 5.4 yards per carry in 2023. He was their bell cow last year. He had 100 yards 6 different times. He had 25 catches for 184 yards. But when you watch this guy as a prospect, man, the way he hits a hole, his acceleration from 0 to 60 is different, man. It's just different. It looks like a man among boys the way he is able to one cut and just hit a hole, and he's gone. He is gone. So Amari Bailey looks like that Pacheco type of running back that I feel like no one's talking about. That could be one of the surprise prospects in this draft. Like weaknesses wise, he doesn't give you a lot of pass protection. He's not a powerful runner. He often goes down on first contact, but this is your prototypical kind of like home run hitter, a guy that, if you're looking for someone with untapped third down potential, a guy with not a lot of tread on the tires, I think Amari Bailey is a great prospect. He could possibly be that like Boston Scott replacement for the Philadelphia Eagles. I love this guy. Make sure you check out Amari Bailey.
All right. I also have a guy I want to give an honorable mention to. It is Kamani Vidal, running back out of Troy. Now, if you've watched the show all throughout the season, you heard me talk about him and pick him as a player of the week once, but obviously he's at Troy. He wasn't highly acclaimed coming out of high school, just a 3-star recruit. But one of the things that sticks out is he is Troy's all-time career rushing leader at 4,010 yards. He also holds 4 of the top 5 single game marks for Troy in terms of rushing yardage. He's just fun to watch. I like to root for these small school guys. He's got good lateral agility. Not afraid to lower his shoulder and run through tackles. I think he's got really good vision. He gets to his top speed quickly, and he had 92 receptions during his time at Troy. So he's dependable out of the backfield. I wouldn't say he has like a full route tree, but he runs a nice wheel route. That's kind of his really good, threatens the flat, snaps that upfield, and he can get behind linebackers and man coverage. However, and this is part of the reason he's at Troy, it's part of the reason he's probably going to be a day 3 pick. He doesn't really have like that extra gear to hit home runs. He consistently will like get good gains, but he's not going to, hit a lot of 50-yard touchdowns. So he also has a strong preference to bounce runs outside, which I find interesting because he's not like a big speed guy. And those are typically the guys that do that. But he's probably maxed out like physically at his height and weight. He's 5'7", which is second percentile, but 215 pounds, which is 55th percentile. But I do think he's a guy that has a chance to stick in the league for a long time as like a role player and like a core special teams player. So he's the guy to keep an eye on. I hope he's able to carve out a role in the league, but he's going to be more than likely a day 3 pick. So that's my guy.
Love that.
You like Vidal?
Yeah, I have him as RB9. So I really like Vidal. I tweeted about him actually, and I think his dad or his brother or something was liking it. Which you guys know that we all love that in NFL draft season. He's something about his pass protection. He actually graded out as the number 1 pass protector on PFF for running backs.
Nice. All right, Mark, give me your honorable mention. Who do you have?
My honorable mention is Will Shipley from Clemson, who college football fans will know the name because he's played in a lot of big games at Clemson. 6 foot 195, 3-year contributor there, very consistent on a yards per carry, PFF grade basis, above 5 yards per carry each year. 84 catches over the last 3 years, 33 touchdowns in that span. He was a high-level 5-star prospect coming out of high school to come to Clemson, which is why he was a starter right away in 2021. Didn't grade out well in 2023 as a pass blocker, but did in years before that. So it's also, when you watch him on tape, I think he holds his own. He's not tiny or anything. So it's not something that I'm all that concerned about at the next level, to be honest. So I think he can hang in that environment. So he's a guy who I think can definitely be used in packages on third down as a passing downs back. And he's a guy who reminds me a lot of Travis Etienne. And that's an easy comp to make because he was at Clemson. But I think Etienne obviously had way loftier stats, way better yards per carry numbers. I think that was partially because Trevor Lawrence was unbelievable and Cade Klubnik and DJ Uiagalelei not so much.
All right, so there you guys have it. Our top running back rankings, along with a few honorable mentions. We have now done interior defensive line. What other position? Quarterback, interior defensive line, and running back. So if you guys missed any of those episodes, be sure you go back and check those out. We also did Senior Bowl winners and losers. We did an Eagles 4-round mock draft. Next week, we are going to be back. We're going to break down the top edge rushers in this class.
Ooh.
If there's any team that loves to draft defensive linemen, it is the Philadelphia Eagles. With the Hassan Reddick trade rumors swirling, could an edge rusher be on the table early in the draft for the Eagles? We'll talk about it next week, and we'll break down the top guys for the position. That's going to do it for this episode of the BGN Draft Show. Make sure you are following these guys on Twitter. Mark is at Mark Henry Jr. Deibs is at Mr. Crockpot. They put out great stuff, a lot of draft content, so make sure you check that out. Deibs has been putting out videos on the BGN YouTube page. If you are not following those, make sure you go subscribe to the BGN YouTube page, and you can check out all of his videos there. We will catch you guys next week for another episode of the BGN Draft Show. Go Birds.